Hey everyone, welcome to our week's lectures on bureaucracy. I am Andrew Ivy, your professor for American politics. Let's dive right into it. I wanted to start with these memes because bureaucracy, even more than Congress, is often described as something that's very, very hated. There's a lot of jokes at the expense of bureaucracy, and some of those jokes are well earned. You yourself have probably had frustration with the DMV. You may have had frustration with admissions or registration here at Riverside City College. Bureaucracy can be very frustrated and very confusing. It's often associated with unnecessary paperwork of taking bits from your resume when you apply to a job and copying and pasting them into the job application's own website, even though you're attaching your resume. But I also see bureaucracy often thrown around as something that's just maligned for good no reason. Like everyone thinks that they have their own spicy, spicy, spicy take on bureaucracy. And it's just simply not true. It's just not accurate the way that bureaucracy is described. So, in this lecture, I'm going to make the case for you that bureaucracy is not as bad as it sounds, that there indeed is a brain and a heart in bureaucracy, and that there is a reason that this is one of the most important bodies of government that we have in the United States. So, people often refer to this as the fourth branch of government. And what it does is it makes the government run. Think about it, and we'll talk about this in a later slide. You have created a law, you've passed it through Congress, the president has signed it. Now what? Who enforces that law? Who manages that law? Who oversees that law? Here you have two prominent examples, the Department of Motor Vehicles and the Food and Drug Administration. Though both might be frustrating, I'm going to make the argument to you that we need both. We need somebody controlling who can get a license in the United States. We don't want somebody who is a bad driver incapable of passing a driver's test on the road. We don't want unsafe products making it to U.S. consumers. Bureaucracy then makes the government run. Now, this is a huge organization, though it's a little deceptive to think of it that way because, one, this is not just one organization. There are many, many different bureaucracies in the federal government, the biggest of which is the United States military. The military comprises the majority of our government's bureaucracies. But overall, there are 493 agencies and commissions, which we would classify as bureaucracies in the federal government. So this is just some facts here, and I want to continue on to the next slide because you are going to see this presented in a neater way. But what I want to show you here is that one, the number of agencies during the Washington administration, there were 4 federal bureaucracies. During Theodore Roosevelt, 7. In 2014, there were 15. Here, I want to talk about the Japanese government. So in 2001, there were 20, and then there was extensive restructuring, and now there are 12. So governments can actually decrease the size of their bureaucracies, and they can synergize their bureaucracies and make them more simple. That is something that can be done. Now, really quick, let's just talk about the current specs. There are currently 15 cabinet departments. Those are different from all bureaucratic agencies. Not every bureaucratic agency is represented on the cabinet. The cabinet is something we talked about last 2 weeks ago when we talked about the executive. Yeah, 2 weeks ago. And they are members of the president's cabinet. They are the president's top advisors, and they represent the president over some of the largest federal bureaucracies. There are more than that, though. And you see, right now, there are about a total of 4.4 million people working in government, the majority of them active duty military. Everyone talks about how much bureaucrats get paid. And it's true, bureaucrats can get paid a lot, but there's way more money out there in the private sector. I promise you, if you wanted to work for the government, you are not going to get paid nearly as well as if you were in the private sector. So, really quick, let's take a survey of some of the graphical information over here. So, let's look at some of the earliest cabinet departments. Remember in in-person discussion, I said the Secretary of State in many ways was like in the beginning of this country's founding, kind of like the vice president. This was a very powerful position that oversaw the president's foreign and much of the domestic policy. Here you had the branch or the cabinet overseeing the budget, and that's the Secretary of the Treasury, Defense overseeing the military, Justice overseeing laws and policing. So, all of these, I would say, diplomacy, economy, security, law enforcement, those are pretty core. That's a bare bones state. That's a state that's doing the or in your lingo, a country that's doing the absolute bare minimum it has to do to exercise what we call sovereignty. But government expanded, and it expanded very, very large, and it acquired new lands. To manage these new lands, there needed to be the creation of a new ministry, the Ministry of Interior. As people farmed these new lands, you needed a government agency to oversee farming and provide subsidies, the Ministry of Agriculture. Now, as robber barons became more and more common and financial regulations, or the lack of financial regulation, created chaos in the U.S. economy, a new bureau was needed, or a new federal agency was needed to oversee commerce and make sure that monopolies did not arise. Monopolies being these collections of businesses that eliminated competition. That's the Ministry of, or the Secretary of Secretariat, Department of Commerce, excuse me. Department of Labor in 1913 to protect workers' rights. Health and Human Services, created in 1953. Housing and Urban Development, Transport, Energy, oversees our nukes, Education, Veteran Affairs, and the latest one, Homeland Security. And I'm including this meme about the FBI, which falls under the Department of Justice. But really, if you're going to worry about anyone spying on you, I'd keep an eye on these guys. So, here are some other federal agencies which are not represented in the president's cabinet. There's Social Security, the EPA, NASA, the GSA, other independent agencies, the Post Office, which is semi independent, we'll talk about that, and the Executive Office of the President. So, total, we have about 20 or 2 million people outside of the military, little more, working in these bureaucracies as of 2013. Here is just that information represented a bit more neatly and with a breakdown of the number of workers. First thing I'll have you know, let's take a look at the largest bureaucracy by far. That is the Department of Defense. Now, the Department of Defense is housed in the Pentagon, a building that many of you have probably heard of. What you should know is that these employees are all civilians. That is, they are not active duty members of the military. That is really important. That's a boon for our democracy. This is a good thing for our democracy. It's a great thing in terms of establishing a healthy relationship between the military and the other branches of government. Notice here, though, a very troublingly small workforce in the Department of State. The Department of State ideally is one of your biggest bureaucracies because they are handling your diplomacy, they are collecting information for the government to help diplomatic relations. This is very, very, very small. Labor. The labor rights in the United States have been much talked about. in these presidential elections, and it is one of the smallest bureaucracies in the government. Some other big ones: justice. This includes the FBI, the Treasury. This includes the Department of the Treasury includes so much it actually oversees the Coast Guard, if you can believe it, and Veterans Affairs, one of the most cumbersome bureaucracies, but most important bureaucracies in the United States government. And of course, you have DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, rising in terms of its size. Now, we should ask ourselves this question before we go. Is this undemocratic? Is it undemocratic that so much of our government is actually handled by people who are not elected, they are not democratically elected, and you don't really know who they are? They are instead appointed or they are hired. In a word, they're professional bureaucrats. And for many of you who have only seen that meme, that is a nightmare. That is an absolute nightmare, this idea of a professional bureaucrat. But in the next video, we'll talk about what exactly that means.